The night was silent, too silent, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Shadows stretched across the hallway, moving where no one should be. From the bathroom, a faint, eerie cry echoed, a child's voice calling your name. It was late October in a small town in Vermont, the kind of place where the wind whispered through the skeletal branches of old maple trees and fog settled low over the streets like a soft blanket. The Winters family had recently moved into a centuries-old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, drawn by the charm of peeling white paint and wide porches. It was quiet, isolated, and exactly what Emma and Michael Winters wanted after years in a bustling city. They had 2 children, 10-year-old Lily and 6-year-old Ben, both energetic yet nervous in the vastness of the old house. From the first night, things felt off. The house was creaky, as old houses are, but there were other sounds too. Sounds that didn't match the wind, the settling wood, or even the old pipes. Small whispers, almost imperceptible, that seemed to drift from the corners of the rooms. Lily had mentioned it first. "Mom, I think someone is in the bathroom," she whispered nervously, clutching her blanket. Emma smiled, trying to hide her own unease. "It's just the house, sweetie. Old houses make all kinds of sounds. Go back to sleep." But as the night deepened, the sounds persisted. They started soft, almost like the sighing of the house itself. Then came something else, a small, high-pitched crying. It was faint at first, almost like it belonged to a child, but it came from the bathroom. Ben, rubbing his eyes, stirred in his sleep. "Mom, Dad, do you hear that?" Michael paused. He had thought the house was settling, but now the sound was unmistakable. A soft, muffled cry, like a child calling for someone in the dark. He got up and walked slowly down the hall, the wooden floorboards groaning under his weight. "Lily, stay in bed," he whispered. "I'll check it out." The bathroom door was closed. The crying continued, now slightly louder, almost pleading. Michael's hand hovered over the doorknob. He opened the door slowly, but the room was empty. The tile was cold, the bathtub still, and the mirror reflected nothing unusual. There was nothing there. Returning to the hallway, he could hear Lily breathing heavily behind him. "See? Nothing there," he said, though his voice didn't carry the certainty he hoped for. But the night was only beginning. The next evening, the family settled in for dinner, hoping the strange sounds were just the quirks of an old house. But as darkness fell, the crying returned. It was different this time, clearer, closer, and now accompanied by a whisper, almost imperceptible yet unmistakable. "You open the door!" Emma froze, her fork midway to her mouth. Michael stiffened. The children looked at each other, wide-eyed and silent. The whisper wasn't a figment of imagination. It had a tone, a presence. It felt alive, speaking from somewhere just beyond perception. That night, the bathroom door trembled as though something on the other side was pressing against it. Shadows moved beneath the door, long and distorted. Lily clutched her stuffed rabbit, trembling. "We're leaving it closed tonight," Emma said, her voice tight. "Nobody goes in there." But sleep didn't come easily. Every small creak, every whisper of wind through the window panes felt magnified. Then, as if to prove their fear wasn't imaginary, the whisper came again, closer, sharper. "You opened the door!" Lily buried her face in her pillow, crying silently. Ben's small hands gripped his sheets, his eyes wide, staring at the bathroom door as if expecting it to suddenly open. By the following morning, Emma tried to rationalize it all. The house was old, the walls were thin, and their isolation in the countryside might be playing tricks on their senses. She even suggested they check the basement or attic for drafts, strange noises, or even small animals. But nothing explained the whispers, the crying, or the growing sense of presence in the house. Over the next few nights, the incidents escalated. The crying now moved around the house. Sometimes it was in the hallway, sometimes just behind the bedroom door. At night, Lily swore she saw a small figure peeking from the edge of her doorway, just a silhouette. Never clear enough to make out features. The whispering grew more insistent, almost teasing. "You, open the door! Now I'm here!" Michael tried installing new locks, setting up a nightlight, even keeping the bathroom door chained. But no matter what they did, the presence found ways to manifest. A shadow flitted along the wall, reflections warped in mirrors, doors slammed on their own. By the middle of the week, the children were terrified to go anywhere near the bathroom. Emma and Michael were exhausted, their nerves fraying under the constant tension. The house seemed alive, and it resented their intrusion. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Emma stepped into the hallway to reassure the children. The wind howled through cracks in the windows and the house groaned around them. Then she heard it, a soft, almost tender whimper. Coming from the bathroom, her heart froze. "You opened the door." This time it wasn't a whisper. It was a child's voice, cold and clear, yet impossibly hollow. It wasn't playful. It wasn't innocent. It carried a weight, a claim, as though the house, and whatever inhabited it, had been waiting for them. Emma called Michael. He came running, and they both stood, frozen, listening. The bathroom door, locked and chained, vibrated slightly as if something pushed against it from the inside. Neither dared to open it. They didn't need to. The presence had already made itself known. By the end of that night, the Winters family understood one thing clearly. The house had secrets, ancient and dark, and they were no longer merely visitors. They had awoken something that had been waiting for decades, something that thrived on fear. And now it was among them. The following night, the wind picked up, rattling the old windows with a frantic intensity. Every leaf that scraped across the porch sounded like tiny footsteps racing toward the house. Lily and Ben huddled together in their room, too frightened to sleep. The whispering, once faint, had grown louder, more demanding. "You opened the door." The voice now seemed to echo through the very walls, bouncing from room to room, shifting in tone as if circling them. Ben's small fingers clutched the bedsheets as a shadow stretched across the floor, impossibly long and darker than the night itself. Lily screamed when the shadow suddenly coiled near her door, moving against the grain of the light from the nightstand. Emma and Michael were awake, watching from the doorway, hearts pounding. Michael whispered, "We can't ignore this any longer. We need to confront it." Emma shook her head, panic evident in her eyes. "Confront it? It's a child's voice, but it's not a child." They decided to stay together in the hallway, keeping a flashlight trained on the bathroom door. For a moment, the house seemed still, as if holding its breath. Then came the sound of dripping water, slow and deliberate, from the bathroom. Each drop echoed in the silent house like a warning. Michael slowly unchained the door, gripping the handle tightly. The metal felt ice cold under his fingers. The crying stopped the moment the door began to open. Lily clung to Emma, shaking. The bathroom was empty, tile gleaming under the flashlight, mirrors reflecting nothing but the dim beam. And then, from the corner near the bathtub, something moved. A small figure, hunched, pale, hair matted, stared directly at them. Its eyes were hollow, black voids, yet filled with a terrible awareness. The whisper came again, closer than ever, right inside the hallway. "You, open the door. Now I'm here." The figure stepped forward, its movement unnaturally jerky, as if pulled by invisible strings. Emma and Michael stumbled backward, grabbing the children. The figure's mouth opened, but no sound emerged, only a shadowy wail that chilled them to the bone. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, plunging the house into darkness. In that black void, the whispers multiplied, echoing from every wall. Lily felt a cold hand brush her shoulder. She screamed. Ben shrieked when he saw his own reflection in the mirror, only it wasn't his reflection anymore. The eyes staring back were hollow, dark, and wrong. Emma grabbed a flashlight, swinging it around. Every beam revealed fleeting glimpses of figures, small, shadowy children, vanishing whenever she tried to focus. They were everywhere, yet nowhere. The whispering intensified, forming words they could almost understand. "You cannot leave. You opened the door." The house itself seemed to respond. Floorboards groaned like the voice of the building. Walls flexed subtly, and the bathroom door slammed shut with a force that shook the frame. Michael tried to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. Behind the door, a low, hollow giggle echoed, mixed with the faint sound of dripping water. The family retreated into the living room, hoping to barricade themselves. Shadows danced along the walls, cast by an unseen source, forming shapes that twisted into grotesque faces. The fireplace lit itself briefly. flames flickering in unnatural patterns, shapes of children reaching out, screaming silently. Suddenly, Lily pointed. "It's in the hallway." The whispering intensified as though a swarm of voices surrounded them. From the hallway, the small figure emerged again, but now dozens more followed, emerging from walls, mirrors, and floorboards. Each figure was silent, their hollow eyes fixed on the family. Emma sobbed, clutching her children. Michael tried to speak, but no words came. The presence in the house had become overwhelming, a suffocating force that thrived on their fear. Then came the final whisper, chilling and commanding. "You open the door. Now you belong to me." The lights went out completely. In that instant, the family felt weightless, as if the very air had been drained from the room. The shadows engulfed them, pulling at their limbs, drawing them toward the bathroom door. The children screamed as the figures merged into one mass of darkness, twisting and writhing, forming the shape of a small child. Lily's own size, yet infinitely wrong. The next morning, neighbors noticed the Winters house unusually quiet. The porch light flickered in the morning fog. The mailbox sagged. But inside, there was no trace of the family. Only the bathroom door remained closed, quietly, just slightly ajar, as though inviting someone, anyone, to open it. And when the wind blew through the cracks of the old farmhouse that evening, faintly, almost imperceptibly, a child's cry echoed into the empty streets. "You open the door." The next story begins. Deep in the heart of Maine lies a forest shrouded in silence. For decades, those who dared enter never returned. Whispers follow the curious. Shadows watch the unwary. And the forest, it waits, tonight. The small town of Ravenwood, Maine, lay at the edge of a dense forest, known to locals as the Silent Forest. Few dared to venture inside, especially at night. Stories of people disappearing, strange lights flickering through the trees, and the chilling whispers of unknown origin had been passed down for generations. Most dismissed it as superstition, but the fear never entirely left the town's collective memory. Ariane Sullivan, a young investigative journalist from Boston, had always been fascinated by the unexplained. When she stumbled upon an old article about the Silent Forest and the disappearances associated with it, she felt an irresistible pull. This wasn't just another urban legend. She was determined to uncover the truth and document it for her blog and podcast series. On a crisp October morning, Ariane packed her camera equipment, a flashlight, notebooks, and a small backpack. Driving up the winding roads of Maine, the forest grew denser, darker, and more imposing. The trees, tall and ancient, stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches interlocking to form a natural archway over the narrow trail leading into the forest. As she reached the forest's edge, Ariane stopped the car and took a deep breath. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. She noticed the rusted sign that read, "Silent Forest, enter at your own risk," half covered with moss and age. Brushing aside her nerves, she stepped onto the path, her boots crunching on fallen leaves. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Birds chirped, a squirrel darted across a fallen log, and the wind whispered through the branches. Ariane set up her camera to record ambient sounds and began taking notes. But as she walked further, an eerie silence settled in. The birds stopped singing. The wind died down. Even the crunch of her own boots seemed muted, as though the forest itself had swallowed all sound. She paused. Something felt off. A shiver ran down her spine. She adjusted her camera and pressed on, determined to record everything. Hours passed, and Ariane noticed strange patterns. The trail seemed to twist unnaturally, leading her back to areas she thought she had already passed. Moss-covered stones, half-fallen trees, and peculiar markings on bark gave her the impression that the forest was alive and aware of her presence. At one point, she heard faint whispers, soft as the rustling leaves. "Ariane." Her heart skipped a beat. The voice was clear, her name, but there was no one in sight. She spun around, shining her flashlight through the undergrowth. Shadows danced between the trees, elongated and unnatural. She convinced herself it was the wind and continued deeper into the forest, though the whispers seemed to grow closer with every step. By late afternoon, she discovered a small clearing. Sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy. But in the center of the clearing stood an old abandoned cabin. Its wooden planks were warped and gray with age, windows cracked, and a thick layer of dust covered the front porch. The door hung loosely on its hinges, creaking whenever the slightest breeze passed through. Ariane's instincts screamed caution, yet her curiosity overpowered her fear. She approached the cabin, camera ready. On the wooden door, scratched into the surface, were words barely legible through the grime. "Do not disturb what sleeps here." Her breath caught. The warning made her pause, but she couldn't turn back now. She stepped inside. The interior was frozen in time. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and cobwebs hung like curtains in the corners. Sunlight filtering through the cracks revealed writing on the walls. Frantic messages etched in deep scratches. "He watches. The forest remembers. Leave before night falls." Ariane took notes and photographed everything. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to appear calm. Something about the air inside felt heavy, almost suffocating. She felt eyes on her, though no one was there. As dusk approached, the temperature dropped sharply. The forest beyond the cabin became a shadowy mass. Ariane's flashlight flickered. She heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, and impossibly light, like someone walking on air. She spun around. Nothing. The whispers returned, louder now, surrounding her in a chorus of unseen voices. They spoke words she couldn't fully understand, but the tone was clear. Warning, malice, and hunger. She realized she wasn't alone, and something had been waiting for her from the moment she entered the forest. Panic rose in her chest. Ariane grabbed her backpack and rushed outside, intending to return to her car. But the path she had walked in earlier was gone. The forest had shifted. Familiar landmarks were gone or twisted into unrecognizable shapes. The trees loomed closer, their branches stretching toward her like grasping fingers. Her flashlight caught movement, shadows darting between the trees. She ran, not daring to look back, but the whispers pursued her. They grew into voices overlapping, screaming, hissing, calling her name. Suddenly she stumbled upon a narrow creek. Water flowed silently, reflecting the dim light of dusk. Ariane tried to cross it, but the current seemed unnaturally strong, as if the forest itself resisted her escape. She paused, trembling. The air was thick with the scent of decay. Her camera slipped from her hands into the water and the glass cracked. The whispers became a cacophony, and in the shadows she thought she saw faces, human, twisted, distorted, peering from behind the trees. Ariane's rational mind screamed at her to flee, yet she felt rooted in place. Something was drawing her deeper into the forest, toward the darkness that seemed alive and malevolent. The silent forest was no ordinary woodland. It was a sentient, ancient presence, and it had noticed her. With her heart pounding, Ariane backed away slowly, trying to retrace her steps. But the forest was changing. Every path, every tree, every shadow seemed to shift, creating an endless maze. And as the final rays of sunlight disappeared, the whispers became deafening. Something moved behind her, slow, deliberate, enormous. A shadow detached itself from the darkness, tall and humanoid, but with limbs that twisted in impossible angles. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed faintly, reflecting her terror. Ariane screamed and ran blindly, branches scratching her arms and face, the whispers echoing in her mind. She had ventured into the silent forest to uncover its secrets. But now she understood the truth. Some places are meant to remain forgotten, and the forest would not let her leave. The night had swallowed Ravenwood, and the forest seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Ariane's breath came in ragged gasps, her heart hammering against her ribcage as she stumbled blindly through the undergrowth. Every step she took felt heavier, as if the ground itself were trying to trap her. The forest whispered incessantly, now louder and more insistent, murmuring her name in 100 distorted voices. Ariane tried to remember the path she had taken earlier, but the silent forest refused to obey the laws of logic. Trees shifted subtly when she looked away. Branches formed unfamiliar shapes, and shadows moved independently of the moonlight. She realized with a cold clarity that the forest was not just alive. It was intelligent, aware, and hungry for fear. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity. Her flashlight flickered, then died, leaving her in near total darkness. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but Ariane forced herself to focus. She dug into her backpack and found a lighter, its small flame trembling in her hands. The feeble light illuminated a narrow path lined with gnarled roots and twisted vines. With no better option, she followed it, hoping it might lead to safety, or at least somewhere she could regroup. Eventually, she stumbled into another clearing. This one was different from the cabin's open space. Here, the trees formed a natural ring, enclosing a small pond whose surface reflected the dim moonlight. But as Ariane approached, she noticed that the reflection was wrong. Her own face stared back at her from the water, but her eyes, they weren't her eyes. They were hollow, dark, almost alive with a sinister consciousness. A chill ran through her spine. The whispers grew louder, forming words she could almost understand. "Join us!" The wind carried a faint metallic smell, like blood long dried into the soil. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over roots, and that's when she saw it. Movement beneath the water. Something large and indistinct, gliding just below the surface, causing ripples that warped her reflection into grotesque shapes. Ariane's instinct screamed at her to run, but her curiosity anchored her in place. She pulled out her camera, hoping to capture evidence, though a part of her feared that recording the forest would somehow anger it further. She clicked a few photos, and immediately the whispers shifted. More urgent, angrier, almost human in tone. It sounded as if the forest had noticed her act and disapproved. Suddenly, the pond erupted. A figure emerged, a twisted humanoid silhouette, limbs elongated and contorted, moving with unnatural grace. Its face was featureless, a smooth mask of darkness, yet she could feel its gaze. Ariane froze, terror rooting her to the spot. The creature raised one arm toward her, and the whispers intensified, screaming her name. She bolted, sprinting blindly through the undergrowth. The forest seemed to fight her escape. Branches wrapped around her legs, roots tripped her, and every time she looked back, the figure, or figures, were closer. Shapes darted between the trees, multiple shadows now, not just one. She could hear them laughing, low and menacing, their voices blending with the wind. Desperate, Ariane remembered the creek she had seen earlier. She ran toward it, hoping to use it as a landmark. The water had grown turbulent, as if stirred by some unseen hand. Crossing it was almost impossible, but she waded in, ignoring the icy cold that bit through her clothes. The shadows followed, lingering at the edge of the water, unwilling or unable to enter. Yet the whispers persisted, urging her forward, taunting her every move. On the opposite bank, she collapsed, shivering and soaked, and noticed something strange. The ground was covered in footprints, small and human at first, then stretching into unnatural, elongated shapes. They crisscrossed in patterns that made no sense, as if the forest itself had walked here, leaving a map for her to follow, or perhaps a warning she could not decipher. By the time Ariane recovered enough strength to stand, night had fully claimed the forest. The darkness was suffocating, pressing down on her from all sides. Then she heard a new sound, low rhythmic drumming like footsteps or a heartbeat echoing through the trees. Following it cautiously, she stumbled upon what appeared to be an abandoned campsite. Charred logs and the remnants of a small fire suggested that someone had been here recently, or that the forest had staged this scene. Among the debris, she found a notebook, soaked and torn, with pages filled with frantic handwriting. "It watches, it knows, it feeds. Do not stay after dark. The forest claims the curious." Ariane's hands shook as she read, the familiar thrill of discovery now entwined with primal fear. Whoever had written this had not survived, or worse, had become part of the forest itself. A sudden crack of wood behind her made her spin around. A tree had split, revealing the hollow interior of a massive trunk. Shadows pooled inside, moving in patterns she couldn't comprehend. She realized then that the forest was not merely haunted, it was sentient, a predator that hunted through manipulation and fear, feeding on anyone who entered after sunset. Her only hope now was to escape before it fully claimed her. She decided to climb a ridge she had spotted earlier, hoping that higher ground would provide some vantage point, some orientation. Every step was agonizing. Twisted roots snagged her shoes, unseen hands seemed to brush against her back, and the whispers were unrelenting, now chanting, laughing, and screaming all at once. Reaching the ridge, Ariane paused, looking back. The forest stretched endlessly, a dark ocean of black trees and writhing shadows. She could see the cabin she had found earlier, now distant and small, like a miniature model lost in the vast, malevolent landscape. And then she saw them, Dozens of shadowy figures moving through the trees, converging toward her, silent hunters guided by the forest's will. Ariane's mind raced. She remembered the creek, the path she had initially tried to follow, the clearing, and the pond. Piecing together a potential route, she sprinted down the ridge, navigating by memory and instinct, guided by the faint moonlight. The shadows gave chase, but seemed hesitant to enter certain areas, perhaps the water, perhaps the light, but they were patient, relentless. Hours passed, or what felt like hours. Time in the silent forest was distorted, bending around its prey. Exhausted and bleeding from countless scratches, Ariane stumbled into a small hollow at the base of an old oak. She collapsed, gasping, barely daring to breathe. For a moment, silence returned, as if the forest paused to savor the hunt. Then the whispers began again, softer this time, like a warning. "We are waiting." Ariane realized something terrifying. The forest did not want just to scare her. It wanted to break her, to wear down her mind and body until she became part of its history, another name in the long list of the vanished. She had survived hours of terror, but the night was far from over. And as the first hints of dawn struggled to penetrate the thick canopy, Ariane knew that escaping the forest was only the beginning of her nightmare. The pale light of dawn filtered weakly through the dense canopy of the silent forest, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. Ariane's body ached from hours of running, falling, and scrambling through brambles. Her clothes were torn, her hands scratched, and her shoes caked in mud. But despite the exhaustion, she forced herself to keep moving. She could not, would not, become another lost soul claimed by this sentient nightmare. The forest had not let up. Even in the dim light of early morning, she could feel it watching, breathing, alive. The whispers were quieter now, more insistent, almost calculating. They seemed to guide her, taunt her, and block her at once. Ariane knew instinctively she was close to the heart of the forest, the center where its power was strongest, where it fed on fear. She reached the pond again, the one with the hollow reflection, and froze. The surface rippled without wind. The eyes staring back from the water were hers, but darker, void-like, glowing faintly. A shiver ran down her spine. She recognized what the forest wanted: submission. If she looked directly into it, let herself be consumed by its fear, she would belong to it forever. Ariane remembered the old notebook she had found at the campsite. One phrase stood out: "The forest claims the curious, but those who face it may escape. Barely." She clenched her fists, forcing herself to confront the fear rather than run blindly. Taking a deep breath, she focused on a single point, the edge of the forest, where she remembered seeing a faint clearing that might lead to the main road. Every step she took was deliberate, ignoring the whispers that now screamed, mocking her courage. Shadows formed in the corners of her vision, humanoid and alien, but she refused to glance at them. She would not feed the forest her fear. Hours passed. The forest twisted and warped around her, yet something inside her held steady. By late morning, she saw it. A narrow, sunlit trail cutting through the darkness, lined with birch trees whose white bark glowed in the weak sunlight. Relief surged, but caution kept her alert. The shadows were patient. They lingered at the edges of the trail, watching, waiting for any hint of hesitation. Suddenly, she heard it. A voice, clear, human, calling from somewhere ahead. "Ariane, come!" Panic threatened to overtake her, but she ignored it. She knew better than to answer. Instead, she pressed forward, each step carrying the weight of exhaustion but also determination. The forest began to thin. Branches became sparse, roots less tangled, and the oppressive presence of unseen entities receded slightly. Still, the whispers clung to her mind, hissing, laughing, warning, promising. Ariane pushed on, guided by memory and sheer willpower, ignoring every instinct that screamed to hide or flee in confusion. At last, the trees parted, revealing the edge of the silent forest. The sun was higher now, bathing the clearing in warm golden light. Relief surged through her body. The sounds of normal life, birds, wind, and distant traffic from the nearby road, welcomed her like a long-lost friend. She had made it out. She was alive. But the forest had one last trick. Ariane turned briefly to look back. The shadows were still there, motionless at the forest edge, watching her, patient and eternal. and she saw something she could not unsee. Faint figures standing among the trees, humans perhaps, or the remnants of them. Pale, motionless, faces empty, trapped forever by the forest's hunger. Shivering, she stumbled down the trail toward the road. A car passed by, its headlights cutting through the early morning fog. She flagged it down, breathless and shaking. The driver, a middle-aged man from Ravenwood, stared at her pale, mud-streaked face and open-mouthed expression. You're alive," he said, voice trembling. No one ever makes it out." Ariane nodded, too exhausted to speak. Her camera, soaked and scratched, hung from her neck. She had evidence, but she knew no one would truly understand the forest's nature. Some things could not be explained, only survived. Back in town, she filed her report with trembling hands. Every word she typed felt heavy with truth. The silent forest was alive. It was hungry, and it remembered. Despite the terror she had endured, she could not shake a lingering sense of unease. At night, when the wind blew through Ravenwood, she thought she could hear the whispers again, faint and mocking, calling her name. She had escaped, but a part of the forest had followed her, a shadow in the corner of her eye, a whisper at the edge of thought. Ariane knew one terrifying fact. She would never be free of the silent forest entirely. It had marked her. The forest's hunger was patient. It waited, and deep in the trees, the shadows stirred, waiting for the next curious soul. If these stories kept you up tonight, make sure to like the video. Leave a comment telling me which one disturbed you the most, and subscribe for more true horror stories every week.